All right, it is 1:15. We're back on the record. I just want to clarify for further purposes that it's May 22nd in the afternoon thereof. All right, it looks like we have Silic and Attorney Cross and Attorney Lawrence. Are we ready to proceed?
Maybe if Mr. Lucky can just confirm that he's present right now.
Yep, there he is.
Okay.
All right, then.
Yep.
Okay, Ms. Zillig, I'm going to have you raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear or affirm under penalties of perjury that the testimony you're about to give in this matter is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
All right, thank you. All right, go ahead, Attorney Cross.
Great. So you're being re-examined in this matter, is that right?
Yes.
Do you know why you're being recalled?
My understanding from reading the order that was sent out by the judge, it's regarding the Teams meeting with Mary Paul
Okay.
in August of 2021.
Great. Do you recall that meeting?
I do not.
Okay. And do you dispute that it happened?
I don't dispute that it happened.
Okay. So let's talk about the context of that meeting a little bit. Now, have you read Miss Paul's notes at any time?
No.
Okay. Have you had explained to you what's inside the notes?
No.
Okay. Have you discussed the notes at any time prior to today?
Excuse me?
Have you discussed the notes anytime prior to today?
I think you brought it up at the last hearing that they existed. And then I read about it in the order from the court.
Great. All right. So, you understand that Mr. Lucky filed a complaint with HR, right?
Yes.
Okay. And what was that complaint about?
I don't recall.
Okay. Did he file a complaint against Frank Gladney with HR?
I believe it was against Fred Gladney, yes.
Okay. Did he also raise any issues about internal affairs at any time?
I don't recall the specifics of it.
Okay. Now, were you at the meeting in which the sheriff decided to terminate Mr. Lucky?
Yes.
When did that occur?
I don't recall exactly, but I believe at the end of 2021.
Okay. And what was the basis for the sheriff terminating or recommending the termination of Mr. Lucky?
Why did he choose termination for Mr.
Right.
Lucky? I don't recall the specifics of what his decision was based on. And that was a year and a half ago.
You don't remember anything about it?
I don't recall the specifics of that hearing. Like I just said, I mean, we have about 10 of them a month and they all bleed together.
Right. So my question was, you don't remember anything about it?
Nothing specific. No, I don't.
Okay. How about anything not specific?
No.
Okay.
I really don't remember.
Now, is there anything unusual about Mr. Lucky's case?
I
Your
don't know.
Honor,
No.
I would object that this is going a little far afield from your order. Perhaps if council can tie it back to the phone call.
Go ahead, Attorney Cross.
Great. Is there anything unusual about Mr. Lucky's case?
Anything about the hearing or I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
Sure. His case for termination. Is there anything unusual about that?
I mean, I don't remember the specifics of the case. I mean, if you want to show me something.
Okay. Do you remember Mr. Lucky refusing to work with Mr. Gladney?
Like I said, I don't remember anything specific about it.
Oh, okay. Do you know who Mr. Gladney is?
Absolutely.
Okay. Who's that?
He's a former deputy sheriff sergeant and union president for the MDSA.
Okay. How did he leave the county?
I believe he retired.
Okay. Does the county have any existing agreements or any agreements out with Mr. Gladney?
I don't know what you mean by agreements.
Well, when he resigned, did he sign a contract?
Sign a contract about his retirement?
Of any kind?
I'm not aware of any.
Okay. Do you know why he resigned?
He didn't resign. I'm pretty sure he retired.
Okay. Do you know why he retired?
I do not.
Okay. Now, you're aware that Mr. Gladney threatened Mr. Lucky, right?
I don't remember the specifics of what he alleged, but I do know he alleged some problems that he was having with them, but I don't remember the specifics of it.
Okay. And Mr. Gladney was suspended, right?
I believe so, but again, I don't, again, I see hundreds of these a year. I don't recall the specifics of it.
The union president. You don't recall the specifics of the union president threatening to assault somebody?
I don't recall the specifics of it. That's
You don't
correct.
recall the specifics of the union president calling somebody nigger?
If you show me something, it could refresh my recollection.
So that event doesn't stand out in your mind at all?
Again, I don't remember the specifics of it, like I said.
Can you answer my question?
I thought I did. I'm sorry.
My question was, that event doesn't stand out in your mind at all. Your answer was, I can't remember the specifics. No. Can
No,
you
it
please
does
answer
not.
my question?
It does not. I don't recall the specifics of that. It doesn't refresh my recollection.
When you say I don't recall the specifics, what does that mean?
Like I already said, I recall that there was a case opened up against him, but I don't recall exactly what was in the case, and I don't specifically recall what you just asked me.
Okay. And whose office, well, I'm going to back up 1 second before I get to that. My question, though, was more generally. When you say generally, I don't know the specifics, I don't remember the specifics of something. What is that supposed to mean to me?
Well, I don't recall what the case was about.
Okay.
Your Honor, before I ask another question, none of this has been tied to the phone call, which is the purpose of her testimony. Can we get that connection, or can she be excused?
You don't feel that this has been tied to this phone call about Mr. Gladney?
Not as of yet.
Okay, Yeah, just maybe a question or two if she recalls talking about this case with Miss Paul. And then we'll go from there.
She doesn't deny that she talked to Miss Paul about this.
Right, if she recalls anything about
Right.
it.
Okay.
Is that a I'm sorry, was that a question?
No, I haven't asked her any question. When did you become aware that Mr. Lucky filed an ERD complaint?
I do not recall that.
Do you recall how you became aware of the fact that Mr. Lucky filed an ERD complaint?
I do not.
Okay. Do you dispute that you were aware of the fact that Mr. Lucky filed an ERD complaint prior to the termination of Mr. Lucky by the sheriff?
I do not recall when I became aware of that.
Okay. And if Miss Paul says that she told that to you on August 31st, would she be lying or something else?
I wouldn't know what her motivation would be for anything. I don't know. I don't know if she did or if she didn't, but I don't recall when I was made aware of it. That's all I'm saying.
I'll be right there for that.
When did you first see Mr. Lucky's complaint to HR?
I don't recall.
Oh, excuse me, 1 second. I'll be right back. Thanks for your patience. Excuse me. All right. So did Molly Paul send you Mr. Lucky's complaint in which he complained that Frederick Gladney made verbal threats towards Mr. Lucky?
Could you ask that again? It kind of faded
Did
in and out.
Mary Paul tell you that the union share with you Mr. Lucky's complaints, and when Mr. Lucky alleged that Frank Gladney, the union president, made verbal threats towards me, which was recorded?
I don't have a specific recollection of that.
Okay. Did she share with you Mr. Lucky's complaint that he had expressed to PSD how Mr. Lucky fears for his safety and that he does not feel comfortable working near or around Sergeant Gladney?
I don't have a specific recollection of that.
Does that mean you
I'm
have no
not, I'm
recollection?
not saying, I'm not saying it didn't happen, but I don't, as I sit here today, have a specific recollection of that.
How were you able to say that it didn't happen or that it
Well,
did happen?
I didn't say that. I said I'm not saying it did or didn't happen. I just don't recall that as I sit here today. I don't have a specific recollection of it.
Okay. And do you recall Ms. Paul sharing with you Mr. Lucky's complaint that a supervisor slash leader and president of the union has threatened Mr. Lucky because of his opinions towards the union? Do you recall that?
I don't recall that.
No, okay. Do you know whether or not Mr. Lucky was able to get a lawyer from the union to represent him in the investigations against him for the incident at Freightert?
Your Honor, again, we're way far afield from your order.
Well, I'm gonna let him go a little bit down this road, but just a little bit.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, can you ask that again?
Are you aware whether or not Mr. Lucky, an attorney from the union, to represent him in the investigation for the Freightert allegation?
I don't recall. I don't recall if he was represented at the PRB hearing or during the investigation. I don't
Okay.
recall.
And just for comparison's sake, do you review more or less investigations than Mr. Novotny?
We have completely different jobs.
Did you answer my question?
Do I what?
Do you review more, I guess the same number, or fewer investigations than Mr. Novotny?
Define the word review.
Well, how about you define it for us? Because you've said that you review hundreds of investigations per year, right?
Right. So you
Right.
want to know what
Is that number
means?
higher, the same, or less than the number for Mr. Novotny?
I can only answer it that I look at them, the investigations when they're completed. He's involved in all the investigations. I'm not. So I don't, the word review to me is when an investigation is completed by him and his team, I then review them. I read them.
Okay. So it's the same number of investigations that you review is the same number that he produces for your review, right?
He reviews probably a lot more than what I review.
Oh, okay. I got it. So in fact, he has more facts to deal with than you do, right?
I guess, what do you mean by facts?
Well, you're saying you review fewer investigations than he does, right?
Right.
Right, okay, because correct me if I'm wrong, but part of what you're claiming here is that you're unable to specifically remember because you have so many facts that you have to sift through in your recollection. Is that right?
I could fairly characterize it. I mean, as it
Okay.
relates to this case, yes.
Okay. So it's also fair to say, based on your supervision of Mr. Novotny, that he in fact has more facts that he's required to review than you do in any given year, right?
Potentially.
Okay. But you don't recall anything specifically about any specific case that you review over the course of a year, right?
You'd have to bring up the case. We're just discussing this particular one of these cases involving.
Right. So we're just, excuse me
So
for
this,
interrupting.
I don't, the answers I'm giving you are my honest answers to your questions. Now, if you ask me about somebody else, other's case, I might. Or
Oh,
like
okay.
most people, I would, show me what you want me to look at and I can maybe answer the questions better. I
You
don't,
don't know what we're talking about? What case we're talking about?
no, I know what case we're talking about. You've asking me specific questions and I'm, the things that you've asked me that I'm not recalling, I'm telling you I don't recall them.
Great. Can you provide us an example of a case in which you remember the details better than Mr. Novotny?
I don't know how to even answer that question.
But you believe that there's some of those cases that are out there. If I knew the answer to that, then if I could identify one of those cases for you, that would be helpful. Is that what you're saying?
I don't really even understand your question. I'm sorry.
Well, correct me. I'm trying to understand your answers. I'm sorry. So help me, please help me if you can. My question to you is, because we're comparing your memory, one of the things that the judge is going to have to do here is to compare your ability to remember versus, for example, Mr. Lucky's ability to remember or Mr. Novotny's ability to remember. So you keep saying that you have so many facts that you have to deal with in any given year that it's hard for you to specifically remember. And then
No,
I asked you to compare how many facts you have to deal with in a given year compared to Mr. Novotny, and you agreed that Mr. Novotny has in fact more facts than you did. So then you said, well, it varies on case by case. Some cases I know more about some things, in other cases I know less about it. It just depends. You have to ask me about specifics. So then I asked you if you had any doubt about what case we were talking about, and you knew perfectly well what case we were talking about. So then I asked you if you were able to identify any case other than this one for where we could compare your recollection with all the facts that you have to deal with in a given year to Mr. Novotny's facts that he has to deal with in a given year. Does that accord with your recollection of the question so far?
Your Honor, I think it's,
how to answer
Attorney
that.
Hitchcock-Cross does not need to be arguing with a witness like this. If he has a legitimate question to ask her, that's fine. I don't think we need to sum her testimony here. I don't think he needs to be arguing with her.
I can understand that there's some question about being able to recall, but I do think that if we can get straightforward questions that she can answer based on what she can remember, we'll be headed down the right path.
Okay. Guess it's criticized Ben Hitchcock cross time. Why don't you give and tell me what I can do to make my questions better, please, Judge?
Well, I'm sorry. I don't mean to say that your questions need to be better, but I think there's some frustration with her inability to recall any specifics about this case. So does she, for example, remember having a discussion about this case coinciding with human resources investigation versus the professional services division case? And what happens when there's a dichotomy there is kind of the line of questions I was thinking we were going under.
Ah, okay. I'll keep that in mind. Thanks. Did the Corporation Counsel ask you to collect documents regarding Mr. Lucky's ERD?
Your Honor, I'm sorry, Your Honor, can I get a standing objection here to all questions that are beyond the scope of, the limited scope of your ruling about Ms. Paul's notes?
Well, we didn't learn, let's just be clear, how we didn't learn that fact that Ms. Lawrence had requested that Mary, you and others, including Ms. Paul, provide their documents to Miss Yu until we found that out, because they didn't tell us in due discovery. We found that out when we asked her, and she provided us with that fact that it happened the day of the termination. So, seriously.
Okay. Your objection is noted, but we're going to continue with.
No, I'm
the
asking just for a standing
questioning.
objection so I can,
Absolutely.
thank you.
It's so noted. Mhm.
Ask that question again.
Did you provide any documents to, were you requested, how about that, to provide any documents in regards to Mr. Lucky's ERG claim?
I do not recall that. The Professional Standards Division, that's their job to work with Corporation Counsel to gather documents that are being requested.
Okay, and did anybody contact you regarding that?
I don't recall that.
Have you looked at your email since then?
No, I haven't. No, I haven't looked at my emails.
Okay. Now, you signed an affidavit in regards to this case, right?
Excuse me?
Did you not hear me?
You
I
were
did not
breaking up.
hear. Part of that was,
You signed an affidavit in regard to this case, correct?
can you tell me what affidavit you're referring to?
Have you signed more than one affidavit in regards to this case?
Well, I don't believe so.
Okay, so then can you answer my question?
I don't recall specifically what the affidavit is about.
Okay. My question was, do you recall signing an affidavit in regards to this case? Your answer to me was, I don't recall specifically what the affidavit was about. Do you understand how that doesn't answer my question?
Your Honor, this is wholly inappropriate to treat the witness this way.
Um, there may be a little bit of, I don't want to say evasiveness, but I think there's some truth to the point that attorneys tend to not make the best witnesses because they are looking for all of the different nuances in any question. So I think we have a little bit of that going on here. And so I think she could answer whether or not she remembers signing an affidavit in this case. So do you remember signing? So do you remember signing an affidavit associated with this case, Ms. Sillig?
Yes.
Okay. And you recall testifying in this hearing before, right?
I recall I was a witness, yes.
Okay. And you were under oath at that time, right?
Excuse me, what?
You were under oath at that time, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And while you were under oath, do you recall stating that your number one priority is protecting the sheriff's department from liability?
I don't recall what I said specifically at that hearing.
I encourage you to go look it up on YouTube. Do you deny saying that?
I don't recall what I said during that entire hearing. It lasted a long time.
Great. Let me ask you another question. Is it true that your number one priority is to protect the sheriff's department from liability?
It's part of my job, sure. Yes,
Okay. And you're working for the sheriff's department right now, right?
right.
Right. Okay. So you signed a document related to allegations against Mr. Gladney for threats and racist epithets towards Mr. Lucky, right?
Your Honor, if I may, I understand he wants her to ask the question, and I understand that you feel that maybe she's being hyper-technical, but perhaps if we could just show her the document rather than Mr. Lucky's characterization or Attorney Hitchcock Cross's characterization of it, we wouldn't have so much back and forth over this. We could ask straightforward questions. Maybe this witness could answer them instead of being argued with and mistreated. If he's got a document, why doesn't he show it to her?
Attorney Cross, is it possible to show her the document to refresh her memory?
Okay. I'm going to go over my understanding of how I believe that this works. Okay. If I ask a witness a question about a document without, and I don't show them the document ahead of time because we don't want what the document says because the document speaks for itself.
Mm-hmm.
Then what happens is I want to continue questioning this person. I can ask them if seeing the document would refresh their recollection. I then ask permission to show them the document. I then show them the document. They are able to read it for a limited period of time. The document is then withdrawn from their view. I ask them if that document refreshes their recollection, and then based on that, I'm able to continue. Otherwise, we got something else going on. What just happened here, excuse me, ma'am, this time I'm not going to give way. What we just had here was another, let's tell Ben Hitchcock Cross how to put on his case routine from everybody. And so what often happens, I've been watching the video, and this is why I've had it up to here with this, is that Miss Lawrence says a general critique, not an objection, just a general, hey, what the heck? I didn't like the tone. I didn't like the characterization. He could have done a better job. What the heck? And then the judge says, ask another question. So that pattern has happened too many times here for this to be fair, which is why I don't even bother to respond as I'm being made clear. But seriously, it would be nice if we could have the witness's testimony and the hearing examiner could examine the testimony of the witness and not the testimony of the opposing counsel, because the sky isn't green, it's not a union matter, and the 300-day window doesn't apply. I'm done now.
You're
I
done.
can
Yes?
make it.
Okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, you're fine to go ahead.
I can make objections based on vague and compound. I think if he wants the witness to answer, he's got to ask a specific question that isn't incendiary.
Attorney Cross, are we?
I'm supposed to answer to Wisconsin nice? That's not an
No.
objection.
No, I understand it's not an objection.
Okay,
Um,
then let's stop wasting my time with it.
okay, let's
Okay,
move along then.
you know, again, because the basis for this here is that this hearing is supposed to be conducted by the law and not common sense. Maybe we can get back to that, to having the witness testify and not Ms. Lawrence continue to testify. So 10 minutes later, I think. Does anybody remember what the question was? Right.
You asked her to identify a document that nobody knew what you were talking about.
Do you recall Ms. Paul sharing with you Mr. Lucky's complaint in which he says, since my entire stay at the Milwaukee County Sheriff's Office, I've experienced racism, harassment, and retaliation?
And I believe I already said I don't recall. So
You said you didn't recall getting that statement?
I do not recall seeing a document from Mary Paul. Isn't that the question? You're referring to a document?
I'll ask it again. Do you recall getting a complaint from Mr. Lucky from Ms. Paul in which Mr. Lucky alleges since his entire stay at the Milwaukee County Sheriff's, I've experienced racism, harassment, and retaliation?
Objection asked and answered.
I do not recall.
Okay, thank you. Do you recall receiving from Ms. Paul a complaint, Mr. Lucky, and she said, the biggest concern right now is that after I made a complaint about Sergeant threatening me, things came much worse for me.
I do not recall that.
Okay. Do you recall the same question, except union members are denying me representation because they do not want to go up against Sergeant Gladney? Do you recall that?
I do not recall that.
Okay. Do you recall Ms. Paul giving you a complaint from Mr. Lucky in which he says the agency is finding multiple ways to get back at me for reporting Sergeant Gladney?
I do not recall.
Okay. Do you recall Mr. Lucky making an accusation that Internal Affairs was retaliating against him at any time?
No, I do not recall. I'm not saying these things didn't happen, right? It's that I don't recall.
Okay. Great. Now, if there's a meeting with you, Ms. Paul, Mr. Novotny, and Mr. Holton, on the sheriff's end of things, who's the highest ranking person in that meeting?
From the sheriff's office, that would be me.
Okay. And the way things work is the highest ranking person makes the decision, right?
It depends on the issue.
Oh, can you tell us an issue which a lower ranking person makes a decision?
I've been in meetings where somebody who's lower ranking suggests a different course of action, and then we go that way.
Oh, okay. And then it's the lower ranking person who makes that decision to go that way? Or it's in fact the higher ranking person who makes that decision after the suggestion by the lower ranking person?
Okay, yeah, right.
Yeah.
Then the higher ranking
Okay.
person would.
Okay. So if there's a meeting with you, Mr. Holton and Mr. Novotny, and after that meeting, Mr. Lucky and Mr. Gladney are ordered not to have contact with each other, who made that decision?
I don't recall that. But that probably would have been the captain of then internal affairs, just because I don't make all decisions for the people who report to me. They make their own day-to-day decisions all the time. So that would be a decision that would come out of PSD.
Okay. Did you ever learn of an investigation into Mr. Lucky for recording Mr. Gladney?
Did I what?
Learn of an investigation against Mr. Let me put it another way. Did you authorize an investigation into Mr. Lucky for recording Mr. Gladney?
If it was an open PSD investigation, I would have authorized them. I don't have a specific recollection of authorizing that, what you say, but I do authorize all the open PSD investigations.
Okay. So it's fair to say that you were aware of both the allegations against Mr. Gladney calling Mr. Lucky nigger and threatening to assault him, and aware of the sheriff's department's investigation into Mr. Lucky for recording those same racist epithets and threats, right?
Objection compound.
All right, I'll split it up. Thank you. So it's fair to say that you were aware of Mr. Lucky's complaints against Frederick Gladney because you authorized the investigation into Mr. Gladney, right?
At that time when it was opened, I would have been made aware of it, yes.
Okay. And you were also aware of the investigation into Mr. Lucky regarding his recording of Mr. Gladney, right?
Again, if that's contained in the investigation referral, I would have been aware of it then. I just don't recall again today what all those investigations consisted of.
Okay, so it's fair to say that at the same time, do you have knowledge of these two things at the same time at any time?
What two things?
Because you're saying you don't recall them now, but you're saying you did recall them at some other time, right?
I don't recall them sitting here today, what happened 2 years ago, okay?
Okay.
But at the time, when any investigation is opened, I read them and I sign off on them.
So there is a period of time.
Difference between what I'm saying, correct?
Sure.
Okay.
So there is a period. The difference is that you don't recall today, but you recall that some other period of time, right?
No, I said today I don't recall what those investigations consisted of. On the day I signed it, which I don't know when that is, I obviously would be aware of that because I read it and I sign it. Whether a year ago, a month ago, or 2 years.
Excuse me. Do you believe that you forget about the facts of that case immediately after you sign the referral?
I don't know what you mean by immediately. I probably was engaged in the case for a while it was open. But again, that was a long time ago.
Okay, so it's fair to say there's a period of time where you are aware of the fact that Mr. Lucky is being investigated for recording the complaint against Mr. Gladney calling him a nigger, and you're investigating Mr. Gladney for calling Mr. Lucky a nigger at the same time.
When I signed that, like I said, I was made aware of what the allegations were. Yes.
Okay. Now, after your meeting with Ms. Paul, Mr. Holton, Mr. Novotny, and yourself regarding Mr. Lucky and his complaint, do you dispute that Ms. Paul met with Mr. Lucky 2 hours after that your meeting started?
I don't have any recollection about that. I think you should talk to Ms. Paul. I'm not the best person to ask that because I have no recollection of that.
Okay. So Ms. Paul notes that on August 18th of 2021, Lucky stated he felt unsafe at work. See below email from Sergeant Baker. I met with Molly, Captain Holton, and Captain Novotny at 1:30 to discuss next steps. I met with Deputy Lucky virtually via Teams at 3:30. Do you believe those are false statements?
No, I'm sure they're not false statements.
Okay. And do you dispute whether or not Ms. Paul emailed you afterwards at 3:44 p.m. About her discussion with Mr. Lucky?
I don't have a memory of that, but if you have those emails and that's what she says, you should definitely talk to her because she might recall that.
Okay. And you haven't seen an email from her to you, reviewed an email from her to you sent on August 18th of 2021 regarding Mr. Lucky in any time this year?
Anytime this year, I didn't review anything to prep for the steering, but I don't recall seeing anything this year.
Okay.
Possible.
Would it help if I shared this document with you?
It would help if you shared every document that you're referring to during all my testimony. Instead
Keep that in
of
mind for future reference.
evasive.
All right. You see this document here?
Can you make it bigger? Okay.
Okay. Do you recall getting this document, this email?
Counsel, does this document have a number?
You got to put it back up there.
This is in the Mary Paul notes.
Okay, it's Mary, do we have a number for that in exhibit?
I don't know.
Okay. Okay.
Do you recall getting this document?
Well, I'm trying to read it. I just conclude my conversation by confirm that he's performed the functions of his job and continue working. Not me, medical clearance doctor. You say the conversation. I don't doubt I got it, but I don't recall the specifics of it.
Okay. And Mary Rozak, that's Mary Paul, right?
Yes.
And you're Molly Zillig?
Yep.
Okay. And 8/18/2021. You see that?
That's what it says. Yep.
Okay. Does this refresh your recollection of Mr. Lucky's issues about feeling unsafe at work?
Yes, a little bit,
How?
because that's what it says there.
Okay. Why is Ms. Paul telling you that he's confirmed that he is able to perform the functions of the job?
She must have asked him that.
Okay. And why is she telling you that she clarified that if Mr. Lucky were to be off work, he would not need medical clearance to return unless he was taken off by a doctor?
I'm assuming there was a discussion on it, but again, don't recall.
Discussion with you.
Well, I'm
Is that right?
assuming, yeah.
Oh, okay. Okay. And would you be just surprised to learn that in fact, Mr. Lucky was not willing to go back to work if supervised by Mr. Gladney?
Would I be surprised?
Mm-hmm.
Um, if he filed a complaint against him, depending on the nature of the complaint, that might not be something that somebody would want to do.
Okay. And why is, because you don't work for HR, right?
No, I do not work for HR.
And you're not Miss Paul's supervisor, right?
I am not Ms. Paul's supervisor.
Well, why is she, and Miss Paul's supervisor, you know who that is, right?
Yes.
It's not Douglas Holton, right?
No.
No, okay. So why is Miss Paul emailing you and Mr. Holton?
HR works closely with, all departments, including ours, to work through a myriad of HR issues that happen on a daily basis.
Yeah, it's one of those ones, fitness
You just cut out
for
again.
duty. Is one of those issues fitness for duty?
I'm sorry, what?
Is one of those issues fitness for duty?
Would HR be involved in the fitness for duty?
Mm-hmm.
Is that what you said?
That's what I said, yeah. Oh, yeah, that's what I said.
Yes, HR will typically be consulted for a fitness for duty.
Okay. And what about one, let's put it this way. Why would Mr. Lucky refusing to work with, say, Mr. Gladney be a problem for your office?
I don't know if it would be a problem. In what way? Do you mean like ask for a transfer, or what are you referring to?
Well, so that you go have Miss Paul go and talk to him about it.
Can you ask that again?
Why would the sheriff's department have Miss Paul contact Mr. Lucky about his willingness to return to work after Mr. Gladney threatened him?
Well, again, I don't recall the specific incident. Do you want me to guess? I mean, I'm guessing because he reached out to her and it's an HR matter in conjunction with the sheriff's office, but I don't recall. And Mary, if she recalls, would be the person who could answer that question.
Okay, but he reached out to HR Mayor Miss Paul, right?
Mm-hmm.
But she wasn't actually investigating or handling his complaint in any way, right?
A workplace rule violation complaint, no, she would not. but she would
No,
typically
okay,
be involved in the items that, surround complaints,
Oh,
are more HR related.
but so she wasn't going to him based on something that he was asking her. She was going to him on something that you were asking her to go to him about, right?
I don't understand that question.
Okay. What in Mr. Lucky's complaint is referred to? How does this letter from Ms. Paul to you reference something in Mr. Lucky's complaint?
You'd have to put it back up again.
Okay.
I don't think it mentions that.
Oh, okay. What's FMLA?
What is FMLA?
That's my question.
It's regulations that govern time off for a serious health condition.
Okay. I'm sorry. Let me put this another way. What does EAP mean? What do those words signify?
That's an employee assistance program, EAP, that the county
What's
has.
the purpose of that?
That's you offer that to employees who may be unsure about being able to reach out themselves for help they may be having for either personal problems, illnesses, etc.
Oh, did
It's a benefit
Lucky have
for,
any problems?
it's a benefit offered by the county.
Great. Did Mr. Lucky, let's put it another way. How is FMLA applicable to Mr. Gladney threatening Mr. Lucky?
I mean, I don't know if that's what she was referring to. I don't recall exactly, like I've been saying.
Great. Can you answer my question?
How could FMLA be related to somebody's complaints about being threatened?
I'll repeat it. No, I didn't say somebody. I said, how is FMLA related to Mr. Lucky's complaint that Mr. Gladney threatened him?
I don't know if it's related to that.
Well, what do you think this letter is related to?
Well, I'm
That
reading
issue or
this.
something else?
Yeah, I mean, it's referring to the fact that he stated his conversation with leadership this morning reduced his stress and made him feel safer at work. I assured him we take his concerns seriously. He has a variety of resources available to him. So if he was feeling stressed out or having any health issues, he could certainly apply for FMLA, or, they're given EAP as a method to help.
So after a meeting with you, the attorney for the sheriff, HR contacted Mr. Lucky and advised him that he could take family medical leave because after he had been threatened by the union president. Is that right?
Objection compound. She can answer.
I don't know. I don't recall that.
Well, based on this document, isn't that what happened?
I mean, I don't know what Mary Paul did next with that part of it. Or I don't recall what she did.
Is FMLA paid or unpaid? Do you know that?
Is what?
Is FMLA leave paid or unpaid?
State leave, the employee chooses, they can substitute their own accrued time if they want to. Federal, the employer can dictate that. So if an employee has accrued time in the bank, they can substitute that time.
Okay. Would FMLA have been paid for Mr. Lucky or unpaid?
I don't know sitting here today if he had accrued time back then,
But that's just him using his vacation time.
or his sick time, depending on how
Oh,
it's
okay, right.
ranked.
But that's his time. That's not the county paying him, right?
Correct.
Okay. So the first proposal here is that he go off of work after being threatened by the union president, right?
I don't know if that was what the first option was for him.
Okay. Do you recall if it was an option for him?
I do not recall. I mean, just reading that, you
You
could
want to
see.
go look at the document again? Will that help refresh your recollection?
Yeah, I think those were what we just discussed. Those were some options that were. I don't recall what they were or what number they were, like what all the options were and.
Excuse me. So it's true that after the union president called Mr. Lucky nigger and threatened to assault him, one of the solutions offered to Mr. Lucky by the county was that Mr. Lucky take unpaid leave, right?
Again, I don't recall exactly what those allegations were, so I'd be just speculating.
Based on
I
this
don't-
document,
I
you're still
don't-
just, was emailed to you, you're still speculating, is that right?
Well, because you keep referring to specific things that he said, and I didn't read that in this email, that those were things that were specifically said.
After your conversation that you had with Ms. Paul, Mr. Holton, and Ms. Novotny, Ms. Paul then reaches out to Mr. Lucky. You admit that you said that, right?
No, I didn't say that. I don't recall what was discussed during that meeting. You're showing me an email that she sent me after the meeting,
Okay,
and that's what we were looking at.
right. So the email that we've had after the meeting confirms that there was a meeting that took place before the email, right?
Yeah, I think we all agree that there was a Teams meeting. The only thing I've been trying to tell you is that I don't recall what was discussed during that call.
Okay, we got that far, and I really appreciated that. And then after that, I is showing this document would refresh your recollection. I then showed you this document. You then read it. I asked then if that refreshes your recollection. I understood that it did. Did I misunderstand that?
It doesn't refresh my recollection about what was discussed during that meeting or what happened next. All I can go from is what was said on that email from Mary.
Okay. Based on what you read in that email from Mary, do you dispute anything in that email?
I don't recall anything, so I certainly can't dispute it. I don't dispute that that's what Mary put in that email. Of course.
Okay. Do you recall after she sent this email to you telling her that she was wrong?
No, I don't recall that. I don't
You
recall.
sent her an email saying that you're full of it's hogwash. I don't believe you said that.
I don't recall. No, I don't recall that.
No. Is that something you've ever done?
Use the word hogwash?
At all sent a communication to Ms. Paul saying that an email that she had written was false.
I don't recall if I have ever done that. No.
No. Okay. So hopefully after that last 15 minutes in mind, we can go back to the question that I had originally asked there, which is, isn't it true that in response to Mr. Lucky complaining to the county that the union president called him nigger and threatened to assault him, that the county had told Mr. Lucky that he could take unpaid time off?
I think that email speaks for itself. I don't, whatever's contained in that email is what Mary Paul told me.
Are you aware of any other communications to Mr. Lucky after this meeting that you, Mr. Novotny, Ms. Paul, and Mr. Holton had?
Communications to Mr. Lucky?
Mm-hmm.
Am I aware of any communications to Mr. Lucky after this email? I'm not.
After this call here.
I'm not aware of any.
Okay, how about the termination?
About the terminate, after he was terminated, was there communication?
Didn't you give him a letter saying you're being terminated?
No, that's not how it works.
Oh, okay. Were you aware that Mr. Lucky got walked out?
That is, yes, that is the process after the sheriff determines if somebody is being, if they're asking for the PRB to terminate somebody, that they are, depending on what the facts, circumstances are, on duty or off, they are either suspended with pay or without pay, and that's their last day at work.
Okay. How did you, well, that's only, of course, if the PRB sustains the charges, right?
No, the PRB has so because the appointing authority can only recommend, the state statute allows an appointing authority to suspend an employee with pay or without pay, depending on, like I said, what happened. While this PRB, before they hear the case, that person is not at work.
Okay.
Then the PRB hears the case and then they decide.
Got it. So what participation, if any, did you have in the process of walking Mr. Lucky out?
I've never been involved in any employees' communication of what the sheriff's recommendations are. So absolutely nothing.
Okay, but you were, other than being aware of it, right?
I was aware that that was the recommendation of termination, yes.
Okay, and you were also clear that the policy was then to walk him out.
Excuse me?
You were also clear that the policy was to walk him out.
Yeah, that's state statute 6310.
Great. So that'll help us cement that period of time, right?
Absolutely.
Great. So what's EAP?
That's the Employee Assistance Program that's run by an outside entity through HR.
Okay. How would that assist Mr. Lucky in his complaint about Mr. Gladney
Again, I
calling him and threatening to assault?
I don't recall that. I can speak to generally EAP, that, and as that email said, that apparently he was having some stress issues. So I'm assuming that's why Mary was going to offer EAP to him.
Why do you think he was having stress issues?
Because it says that in the email, the first sentence.
Great. What do you think was causing him stress?
I'm sure it's involving his allegations.
You mean the ones in which Mr. Lucky, Mr. Gladney calls Mr. Lucky nigger and threatens to assault him?
Again, I don't have a specific recollection of exactly what was involved in that case, but if that's what was involved in that case, then yes.
Or do you mean his allegations, or possibly, and do you mean his allegations that every time he makes a complaint to internal affairs, he gets retaliated against.
Wait, what?
Do you also mean Mr. Lucky's allegations that every time he goes to internal affairs, he gets retaliated against by internal affairs?
I don't recall what his allegations were again. As I sit here today, 2 years later, I do not recall them.
Okay. Do you dispute that you received Mr. Lucky's HR complaint and reviewed it with Mary Paul and Captain Novotny on April 30th of 2021?
I don't have a specific recollection of doing that, but I typically will look at complaints that are filed like that. So that's the only way I can answer that.
What did you mean by just typically, what complaints are we typically talking about?
Like an employee complaint, like you're saying, Lucky made a complaint to HR.
So you look at all the HR complaints typically?
If they're regarding possible rules violations, yes.
How about race discrimination?
That would violate our discrimination harassment policy. Potentially, depending on what it is.
Okay. Now, do you dispute at that meeting that Ms. Paul told you that Lucky was making his own contact rules over the weekend in regards to Sergeant Byers?
Excuse me?
Do you dispute that Ms. Paul told you that Lucky was making his own no contact rules over the weekend in regard to Sergeant Byers?
I don't recall what Mary said during that meeting.
Okay. Do you recall anybody telling you about Lucky making his own no contact rules?
I don't recall that. I mean, I don't
Okay.
recall that or anything.
Well, do you recall there being any no contact rules between Mr. Lucky and Mr. Gladney?
I don't recall that.
Okay. And you recall, or did you dispute that on August 30th, 2021, Ms. Paul told you that the union was refusing to represent Lucky due to a conflict of interest?
You're gonna have to say that again. You faded out.
Do you dispute that on August 30th of 2021, Ms. Paul told you that the union is refusing to represent Lucky due to a conflict of interest?
Like I said, I don't recall that conversation on the 30th. So if I don't recall it, I can't hardly dispute what Mary Paul is saying.
Okay. Now, when a deputy is investigated by internal affairs, do they normally get assistance from the union?
Are you just saying typically based on what I know?
That's right.
Typically, they get assistance from the union, yes.
Okay, typically, what does that assistance consist of?
I do not know what they do with the union at all, except for as it relates to what we do. The union representative, if a deputy requests it, will be present when PSD does their interview of the subject. As it
Okay, anything
relates
else?
to anything else they could do, I wouldn't know how they do that because that would be internal with the union.
Okay, how about a WERC hearing?
I don't get involved in those too much. That's corporation counsel. But
How about a PRB hearing?
PRB hearing, yes. Typically, they are represented by a union attorney.
Okay. So as of August 30th of 2021, you were aware, or you don't dispute that you were aware that Mr. Lucky wasn't getting any assistance from the union with either his internal affairs investigation or an eventual PRB. Well, let's start with his internal affairs investigation, right?
I don't recall if he had a union representative at his hearing, but if you show me the, the tape or whatever, you'll know who's at the hearing with him. I mean,
Okay.
I don't recall with this particular case if he had union representation with him at the interview.
I'm going to ask that question a slightly different way. Because my question isn't about whether or not you recall if he had a representative with him at the interview. My first question is whether or not you dispute whether or not Ms. Paul told you that the union is refusing to represent Lucky due to a conflict of interest.
Again, I don't recall that conversation, so I couldn't dispute anything that when anybody says they can recall.
Now, did you dispute ever knowing that the union would not represent Mr. Lucky due to a conflict of interest at any time?
I don't recall that. That doesn't mean that it's not true, but I don't recall that as it relates to him.
Okay, and just so we're clear, how long have you worked with Ms. Paul?
In her current job,
No, ever.
I
Like she was
think I don't know when she joined the county, but I know I've been working with her for at least 2 years since I came here.
okay. And that time, have you ever known her to make a false statement?
I mean, I don't think she's ever made one to me, but I don't know if she's made false statements in general,
I'll
but
keep that in mind.
not to me.
Can you answer my question, please?
What's your question?
Have you ever known Ms. Paul to make a false statement?
I've never heard that she's been accused of that. I've not, like I said, to me, I've never heard her make a false statement to me. I don't know about in her every single other thing she's ever done, but I can
Great.
only answer for myself.
Great. So with that answer in mind, are you able to say whether or not if you believe that if Ms. Paul wrote something in her HR notes that is an accurate representation of what happened or something else?
I would think so.
Okay. Now, do you dispute that Ms. Paul told you that her internal affairs granted Mr. Lucky an extension for his interview date?
I have no memory of that.
Did you discuss
But I
Mr.
wouldn't dispute it because again, I don't have a memory of it, so I can't possibly dispute it.
Did you discuss an issue with an extension for Mr. Lucky with Mr. Novotny at any time?
I don't recall doing that. Doesn't mean I didn't, but I don't recall it.
Okay. And is Mr. Novotny authorized to grant extensions on his own, or does he have to go to you
An extension for what?
for an interview date?
Oh, yeah, he can do that.
Okay. Has he ever come to you to get an extension on an interview date?
I don't recall.
Hmm. And again, in this meeting that you don't dispute that occurred between the two of you, Mr. Novotny and yourself, you're the higher ranking person, right?
Are you talking about the meeting with Mary Paul?
Mm-hmm.
On which date?
Either or any of them. Any meeting that you had with Mr. Novotny, you are going to be the higher ranking person, right?
Yes,
So any decision that comes out of that meeting is necessarily going to be your decision, right?
typically, yes, like I said.
Okay. And you weren't able to provide us with an example of an atypical example, right?
Perhaps to give somebody a new hearing date, that is certainly something that Mr. Novotny could decide to do.
Okay. Now, when Ms. Paul wrote in her notes on August 31st of 2021 that Mr. Lucky informed her that Mr. Lucky mailed a complaint to the Equal Rights Division and sent the same HR complaint to Margot, do you believe that she's lying when she wrote that?
I would have no reason to believe she's lying.
Okay. And then after that, when it says that she followed up with Molly on the conversation, do you believe she's lying then?
Conversation about what?
That Mr. Lucky informed Ms. Paul that he, Mr. the complaint.
No, I have no reason.
Sorry. Okay, I couldn't hear the question, sorry.
I have no reason to believe she's lying.
Great. Now, if Ms. Paul puts in her notes on August 31st of 2021 that Mr. Lucky says that he believes that if internal affairs cases were actually investigated, he wouldn't have been suspended in the past. Do you think she was lying then?
I say that again?
Do you believe that Mary Paul was lying when she wrote in her notes on August 31st of 2021 that Mr. Lucky believes that if internal affairs cases were actually investigated, he wouldn't have been suspended in the past?
I have no reason to believe that she wrote that in her notes. That's your question again?
No, my question is, do you believe that she's lying when she put that in her notes?
No.
No, okay. And you believe she's lying when she says that she followed up with you on this conversation?
I have no reason to believe that she'd be lying on her notes with any of those things.
Okay. So it's fair to say that it's likely that it happened, right?
The things that are contained in her notes?
Right.
I don't know how I can offer any relevant testimony about what Mary said in her notes. I mean,
Okay.
you know,
Do you recall investigating Mr. Lucky's complaint that if internal affairs cases were actually investigated, he wouldn't have been suspended in the past?
I don't recall the specifics of that investigation and if that was part of it. No.
Okay. Do you recall when you sustained charges against Mr. Lucky for the Cratered Hospital incident, whether you included the fact that approximately 15 days earlier, Mr. Lucky had complained to HR that if AI cases were actually investigated, that Mr. Lucky wouldn't have been suspended in the past?
Objection compound.
You lost me after when I sustained. I don't sustain anything. That's up to the sheriff. And then the PRB.
Okay, I appreciate that. And I'm happy to accommodate your vocabulary. What is the verb that you use for the actions that you take in regards to passing along with your approval charges against employees?
When an investigation is complete? After it's
Yeah.
completed or when it starts?
So as I understand, and sure, you authorize the investigation gets completed, some of them come to you. At that point, you do what verb?
I review the investigation basically just for completeness and form, and then it
Okay,
goes to the chief deputy, who signs off on it, and then it goes to the sheriff, and
Okay.
he reviews it and decides what his recommendation will be to the PRB or an imposition of discipline that's allowed under the statutes.
Very good. So when you review this complaint, this investigation summary for completeness, right? That's the verb we're going to stick with?
Yeah,
Okay. When you reviewed it, did you note the fact that Mr. Lucky 15 days prior had made a complaint that if internal affairs cases were actually investigated, he wouldn't have been suspended in the past?
I don't recall. I don't recall that being part of it or discussing. I don't recall those specifics about the case.
Okay, but that would help make the investigation more complete, wouldn't it?
I wouldn't know that unless that was, I wouldn't know.
Well, whose job, is there somebody else whose job it is to review it for completeness?
Yeah, the chief deputy and even when it goes to the sheriff.
Okay. So when on August 31st of 2021, Miss Paul said that she followed up with Molly on the conversation, she didn't say that she followed up with the chief deputy, right?
Right.
She didn't say she followed up with the sheriff, did she?
I don't think so. Are you referring to that email again?
I'm referring to the fact on August 31st, Ms. Paul says that she told you, followed up with you on her conversation in which Mr. Lucky says that he believes if IA cases were actually investigated, he wouldn't have been suspended in the past.
You're telling me that's what he said, correct?
I'm telling you that Ms. Paul says that he told that to her,
Yeah, he told us.
and that she
Just
says
trying
that
to
she
follow
followed
your
up with
very
you after that.
question. I'm trying to follow your question.
Great. How can I help you?
Well, your questions have such a long introduction and it's hard to answer.
Hmm. Oh, okay. So did we get the part about, is there anybody else besides you refuse it for completeness? No, yes, it's the deputy sheriff. Yes, it's the sheriff. Okay, she didn't talk to the deputy sheriff. She talked to the sheriff. So when she talked to you about Mr. Lucky having filed an ERD complaint and having said that making a complaint against internal affairs, did you, for the sake of completeness, or sorry, you would agree with me that that would have made the document that you passed on to the chief deputy more complete, wouldn't you?
You're referring to the Freidert investigation, correct?
That's right.
Yeah, I mean, well, it didn't have anything, that's the Freidert case. Do you know what that one's about? That's a different case, different facts. That's, those investigations are about the case that's specifically been referred to them for investigation.
Oh, what do you recall about the Frater case?
I recall that an employee made complaints about former Deputy Lucky and his behavior while he was at work, and that's the basis of his termination.
Oh, okay. So you can remember specifics about the complaint against Mr. Lucky that resulted in his termination, but no other cases. Is that correct?
No, I don't remember the specifics other than an employee made a complaint about his behavior at work. I don't recall specifically what those allegations were. But
Okay.
I recall the Prater case, just like I recall his case, but I don't recall the specific allegations of them.
Okay. And you understand that for any case that's going to happen, internal affairs is going to investigate, right?
Right, they're going to investigate the facts specific to that particular case.
Okay. So if an employee is making a allegation that internal affairs is retaliating against him, and the case is coming to you from internal affairs, how would including that information not make the information more complete?
First of all, I don't recall if those allegations were part of the case. And again, I can answer it the same way I did before. I know you don't like my answer, but it's a specific case about specific facts that were investigated. And that's what those cases, that's what any particular case focuses on, the case at hand that was investigated, those facts.
Okay. And you know what retaliation is, right?
Yes,
Okay. And it's possible that if somebody files a complaint, somebody can be retaliated against for something that has a basis in fact, right?
right.
Right. Okay. So the fact, though, nevertheless, the fact that they have supposedly done X, Y, or Z is part of the story. But the other part of the story, for example, is that they made a complaint, right?
Objection compound and vague.
Well, that's just one question there. But the other part of the story is that he filed a complaint, right?
Yeah, he did. Yes, at some point. Yeah, after the Prater case. Yes.
But before you sent it to the chief deputy.
Correct.
Okay, how do you recall that?
Because you already said that.
Oh, okay. Now, when you were in the meeting with the sheriff discussing the possible termination of Mr. Lucky, did you raise your hand at any time and say that Mr. Lucky filed an ERD complaint?
I don't recall.
How about that Mr. Lucky alleged that he was being retaliated against by internal affairs?
I don't recall.
You'll agree with me that that information would have been helpful for the sheriff in making his determination on whether or not to terminate Mr. Lucky, wouldn't you?
That he filed a complaint? Is that what your question is?
You'll agree with me that the fact that let's say the sheriff wasn't aware that Mr. Lucky had filed an ERD complaint means he didn't have the whole picture when he made the decision to terminate Mr. Lucky, won't you?
Well, I disagree with that. Like I said, I mean, the case is based on its own facts about what happened related to the Prater case.
Okay, but based on that theory, retaliation could never exist, right?
Anybody could make any allegation they want, I suppose. So yeah, I mean, retaliation could exist. I mean,
Anybody could always make any allegation, right?
exactly.
Okay, so how did that answer my question?
And our cases are handled professionally, without bias, and investigated.
Okay.
And the sheriff, you know, he makes his recommendation. Only the PRB can eventually terminate. So
Oh, okay. And did you sit in on the PRB hearing?
I probably about not even 50-50 do I sit on them. I recall maybe listening to one witness on this one, and then my day was too busy.
Oh, did you send a letter to the PRB saying that Mr. Lucky had filed an ERD complaint prior to the sheriff terminating him?
Me personally? I don't recall doing that.
Okay. Did you send a letter to the PRB saying that Mr. Lucky had made allegations that every time he goes to internal affairs, he gets retaliated against prior to the sheriff making the decision to terminate him?
I didn't do anything like that personally. I'm sure he brought it up, but
How are you sure of that?
well, because you're making it as something that you believe that should have been discussed. So I'm assuming you raised it at the PRB because they decide on terminations. And they determine if investigations were fair or not. It's one of the 7 tenets of just cause. I'm just assuming you brought it up.
Well, maybe it would help your assumption. You'll agree with me, I guess, that if the county had hid that document from us until January of 2023, that we would not have known about that fact until January of
Hid what document? I don't
Really?
know what document.
the Mary Paul notes, that it informed us of the fact that you knew about the ERD complaint on August 31st of 2021.
Is there a question in there? I'm sorry, I don't, is there a question? I hear some feedback. I don't know.
I did too, but I'm not hearing anybody else's other than you, Molly.
No, I'm not asking a question right now. There's some feedback. That's true. Okay.